Welcome to the Break and Enter podcast with Jahan Kalanta and
Traci Chen.
where two lawyers from very different worlds talk about the stuff they have in common. And today we're talking about your world, Traci, the world of migration.
What a world.
What a world. We know why you got into migration. You shared that in one of our earlier episodes, and no doubt anyone listening to this will have subscribed and heard that. But tell me about migration law. I mean, that's a big topic. Give me the basics. I know nothing.
Okay. I think when you start as a law student, you don't actually ever study it. I think it's actually just a, what do you call it?
Elective?
Elective, yeah. And so I never studied it. But people don't even really know it's like a really serious area of law.
It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially administrative law, but it's crazy. So the thing about migration law is that there's so much politics behind it. And so it changes every single day. And I think that's the most fascinating part about migration law. Yeah, people say, that's the law though, but why can't you make this happen or why can't you make that? But there's politics behind it. Yeah. So even though there's black and white law there, sometimes the way that's interpreted or sometimes how, the case officers make the decision is very much political at that time. So at the moment, for example, I don't know if you've seen the news, there's a lot going on with student visas.
Yeah, huge.
So over the last, especially just after COVID, there was a huge influx of international students who came to Australia. And at that time, it was full-time working rights because everything that happened in COVID, Australia needed more workers. So they allowed students to have full-time working rights. But what that did was it actually affected the integrity of the actual program because a lot of people were like, oh, I can just get a student visa to come to Australia and work full-time. So they weren't genuine students.
Yep.
So what that's happened now is obviously there's a new government in place and they keep quoting in all their content that they've inherited a very broken system. And what they're doing now is they're cracking down on student visas, and the law hasn't essentially changed. There's going to be some regulation changes on the 23rd or 24th of March, but the law is still the same over the last 6 months. But the refusal rate over the last 6 months has really gone up. And people don't understand why. They're like, but I've met all the requirements. I'm like, yeah, you have. But deep down, they can also see through the application.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, you can write a story, you can write a statement, but they're not going to believe you because they look at the society or they look at that group of applications as a whole, how they're like. So that's one of the most interesting parts about migration is that, yeah, you can say there's black and white there, but there's so many different things that can affect it.
It's funny because crime is the exact same, right? So, you'll have, God forbid, a bunch of young people die at a music festival, and then there'll all of a sudden be a huge influx of, policing around that. You'll tend to see heavier sentences. My relationship to migration law is really twofold. I used to do some refugee review tribunal work once upon a time, and I've done some judicial review stuff. So for those of you who don't know, judicial review is if you're unhappy with a decision made by the executive, because a functional government has three arms: the executive, judiciary, and legislature. If you're unhappy with how the executive or a case officer and the AAT makes a decision, you always have a right to take it to a court and say, hey, they did something unlawful. There was an error legally that infected the process. So I've done a bit of that. And also that I have had cases where because of a criminal action, there has been a consequence that has flown to their visa status. That's not uncommon. And those sorts of things. But it's a huge area and it's growing. I mean, what would you say to a young person who wanted to study migration law and get into it?
I think be ready for the industry itself and all the changes. Yeah, I think that would be my main advice. It's not something that you think you can learn it and you'll be able to give ongoing advice. Like some of the best migration lawyers, practitioners out there are actually the younger ones because they're actually across everything. I was talking to a new practice leader recently employed, and she worked with this lawyer who's very famous in the migration industry. She's been around for a long time. And she said that this lawyer's probably in her 60s or something like that. She was saying she was sitting next to her office, listening into a consult she was doing, and she was quoting the wrong visa subclasses.
Wow.
Because those visa subclasses don't even exist anymore. But someone who's been in the area for like 50 years, if you're not across it, if you're not on TikTok every day or, watching the news every single day, you don't know that information because it just changes that fast.
It's wild, isn't it? I mean, I think that there's, for many lawyers, we hate uncertainty and we wish there was like a checklist, like you just go through and tick, tick, tick. But in highly charged areas of the law where there is always going to be a response based on the government of the day, you are always going to be making these decisions, and you're always going to be looking at things sort of from this angle and that angle. Do you think the system's broken? Sorry.
Look, I think, so that's back to what you were saying before. I think that's one of the biggest things. So my clients, they come to the consultation, they want to plan for the next 2 years on what's going to happen and how they're going to obtain their permanent residency or get their visa here in Australia. And I say that's very easy said, but again, things change all the time. You can't, because there's so many things to think about. There's obviously Australia as an economy, as a country, and how we can support, these migrants when they do come.
Yep.
So it very much changes on that every single day, because I think, since all these people have come after post-COVID, there's been a huge toll on our healthcare system.
Yeah.
It's been a huge toll on a lot of areas of the government. So they have to weigh all those things up. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that. They're like, well, I want to do this now and know that I have this in 2 to 3 years. But the reality is that these things change every 2 to 3 months.
And surely there's got to be cases where it changes in their favor. The job that they do all of a sudden becomes something that we don't have enough of, or becomes strategic in nature and has some sort of influx. Does that happen as well?
Yeah. And I think the bottom line, the good thing is that at the end of the day, Australia's population is still very small.
Yep.
And the government has every intention to grow our population, because without that population, we don't have an economy. But it has to be done in dribs and drabs in a way that our infrastructure, everything can actually support that.
Yep.
So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's growing pains.
Yeah, it is.
It's growing pains. That has to be super tough when people expect a plan, and then, they might be a year into the plan and the government comes along and completely changes things. How do you deal with that?
It's probably one of the tougher parts of our job, essentially, and it's something we have to train our junior lawyers on from the get-go. I think at the end of the day, the strategy part is really important, but it's about prepping the clients and giving them a realistic expectation and timeline as well. So there's different processes and different visas, obviously. I tell them about, for example, if it's an employer-sponsored visa, I do tell them, okay, you can expect your visa at this time based on the current processing times. But obviously that comes down to, government funding, about how many case officers they have in there doing their job as well. There's a huge shortage at the moment and they're hiring like crazy. A lot of lawyers that I know have worked in migration have actually gone to work as AAT members as well for the tribunal, because there's just the caseload is just huge there. However, for a client that's not going down the pathway of employer sponsor, it's a little bit different. So we have this visa called the skilled visa. And how that actually works is there's a temporary one which leads to permanent residency, and then there's one that is actually direct permanent residency. But how that works, it's by invitation only. So you have to submit an expression of interest, and depending again on politics and what's happening on the time, and I'll touch on that in a minute, what's happening at the time, you'll receive an invitation. And look, I sat in a seminar a long time ago. One of the case officers was talking about it. He had been working in the department since the 1990s. And so this skilled visa is points based. And how it works is there's certain criteria you have to meet to get the points, and then you can get an invitation. So back in the 90s, so the cutoff at the moment is 65 points as a minimum. And back in the days, it was 60 points. And so people were getting invitations at 60 points. Yep. And he said, if you had 80 points, for example, you get invited 2 days. You get your PR invitation 2 days, and processing was very quick back then. But now 80 is low. It's not even it's nothing. 80 points is nothing. People have 100 or 105 points. And if I actually explained the points table to you, it's actually very hard to achieve 100 points. It's a lot of work. And a couple of years ago, again, when I was sitting in this webinar, at that time, he was saying there's something just for one visa, there's 3 visa subclasses that fall under this pathway. But for one of them, was 100,000 applicants waiting in the queue.
Sheesh.
So it's
waiting for invitations.
Waiting for an invitation. That's just one of them. There's 3. So I think now would be more than that. So you can see that it's not easy. So it's not as easy as submitting an expression of interest and getting an invitation. So what I do say to my clients is that we've got to strategize, and we've got to review the strategy every 1 to 2 months, because there's just so many changes. So what these migrants find themselves doing is they study at, in Sydney, and then once they graduate, they get a temporary visa, and all of a sudden depending on what's happening, they have to move to Perth. Yep. They have to move to South Australia. They have to move to Tasmania to change their strategy and increase their chances of being invited.
Yeah, wow.
And that's the hardest part. And so that one I usually explain to them, look, give yourself a good 18 to 24 months to get an invitation, but an invitation at this point is not guaranteed.
That's rough. And you touched on the politics side of things. Like, how does, you know, how can anyone predict what the government of the day will do? I mean, they've got their entrenched beliefs, and you could assume certain things, but obviously that changes day by day.
It does, and it changes on, you know, what the demands and needs of the labour market is in Australia right now. So at the moment, there is a huge shortage of early childhood teachers and nurses. So what we've seen over the last 24 months is any nurse, childhood teachers lodge their expression of interest, and they'd get invited in like 1 or 2 months, which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. Then they get they also had priority visa processing. So if you had that occupation, you get your visa processed in like 1 to 3 months, and any other occupation that falls outside of that, for example, a software engineer or a chef, you're looking at over 13 months for a visa grant.
Wow.
So they just can't prioritize it. So that's based on, you know, what they have and what's going on in the department at the moment, what their resources kind of look like as well.
Once upon a time, was a software engineer or a chef someone who'd get invited a lot faster?
Yeah, back in the days. And there was once upon a time, and I think it was 2015 through maybe 2014 to 2016, accountants.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the golden occupation was accountants. And you still have that now, because once upon a time that happened, and then education agents overseas were saying, yeah, if you just study accounting, you'll get your PR.
Yep.
And so everybody came to Australia to study accounting. And they still have a lot of them. And so now there's definitely too many, accounting graduates here in Australia at the moment.
This is wild. This is, you're taking people's lives, and you're just, you're making them run through this gauntlet and changing the rules, and it's crazy. How do you cope with the stress of that? That's got to take a toll.
It does. It's very, I think with migrants in general, it's tough because the uncertainty, and you want to start your life.
Yeah.
Imagine if we knew that we couldn't start our life for like 3 years, and we didn't know if it was even going to happen. Even with like uni, you're like, oh, I'm going to graduate in like 4 years time. I know I can start my life. But if migrants were given like 4 years, they're probably okay with it. But it's 4 years, and we don't know. You know, it's still uncertain. So it's really tough, and we just have to understand where they're coming from, know what's at stake as well, and just keep trying to find the best strategy for them. So there's some clients where we've moved them from Sydney to Perth to South Australia, and there's 3 moves, but we got there in the end. But it just needs to happen, and motivating them every single day that it will happen, because it does. I called a client the other day, and they've been in Australia for 9 years, and what she'd been lacking is superior English, so you have to get a high English score, and she kept trying. She did a lot of tests, but she finally got the English score, and she got the invitation 1 month afterwards when we updated the application, and it was just tears. The phone call was just tears, and that makes the job, that makes the job worthwhile.
Let's talk about the flip side. Tell me about a client that you didn't like dealing with, because I think it's all well and good when a worthwhile, decent human you've helped. I refuse to accept that there's any lawyer that loves all their clients.
Of course, it's very tough. I think the big thing is that because Australia is, we have our checks and balances in place, and we respect the law. Well, you'd hope that a lot of people do respect the law. The government tries to be transparent. A lot of people try to, do a dodgy, and they want to, I've seen situations. Yeah, I've seen situations where, let's just say someone has employment experience, and we're reviewing the documents, and I could see straight through that these documents were made up.
Like what?
Yeah,
like a fake certificate from a uni that doesn't exist.
No, well, that happens definitely. Fake employment contracts, fake, pay slips. Because the numbers don't even add up.
What do you mean?
I looked at it, I'm like, hold on, why is this like, how you have the year-to-date payment?
Yeah.
Like, you have the one after, the amount is less than the week before. So there's something that's gone wrong there. And when you question them about it, they're like, you're my lawyer, you're supposed to make it work. I'm not doing anything fraudulent, that's not how the law works. And that's one of the hardest things, I think. It's just the way they operate in certain countries, these things are okay. I was talking to someone the other day, the government, I don't know what country it was, but the government only accepts cash at the office, like things like that, Australia.
What is a part of your job that really makes you feel satisfied, that you just go, that's fantastic?
I mean, essentially, it really is changing people's lives. I think we've migrated a long time ago, and our parents are probably more involved in that process than us. I appreciate it so much today. But can you imagine, coming from another country, coming to Australia, you see the land of opportunity, and look, at the end of the day, there's so many things that's going on here. You really can see a future here. What it would mean to one day be like, to hear from your agent or your lawyer that you got your permanent residency. Like we can't, we can't fathom that because we didn't experience it. But it's a very, very proud moment. It's literally life-changing for them.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm inspired. I wish I'd done it. It sounds like...
I think criminal law is very cool.
Well, we'll talk about that in my episode, won't we? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Keep tuned. Like, subscribe, follow, do all those bits and pieces. We will be coming at you regularly with more Break and Enter.